like I was saying before we started recording, you've been this kind of mysterious figure on the back of a book that's meant a lot to me over the years, King, Warrior,
Right.
Magician, Lover, that you co-wrote or collaborated on with Robert Moore.
Hmm.
But like I said, I've never really heard your story, and Robert Moore was a very extroverted, big personality, so he was really out there after that book, and so a lot of people associate that work with him. But I've always been curious, who's this other bearded man on the back cover of this book? And so I hope like we could start just by talking a little bit about that, because for a lot of people listening, that might be the entryway into, talking about the rest of your work.
Sure. Uh, how many years ago was that? 34, I think, 35 when we started writing. Well, I went to Chicago Theological Seminary for my MDiv degree, specifically because Robert Moore was there.
Hmm.
And I was told, I hadn't ever met him, but I was told that he uh, looked at Christianity through a Jungian lens. And I was very interested in that. I'd been into depth psychology for several years, and so I went. I met him. He became my mentor, and I think it's true to say that I became basically his star student. And okay, so I graduated. I had a church and in the Chicago area, and a couple of years after I'd graduated, Robert called me and he said, "Do you want to write a book together?" I said, "Okay, about what?" And I was not in men's work at all at that point,
Hmm.
in any kind of direct way. It was a part of the Jungian analysis I was getting at the time, but it wasn't the focal point. So anyway, I said, "Okay." And so he said it's about the male psyche. Okay. So then we started having a series of meetings, and I started watching his tapes of his lectures and that sort of thing. And so I got up to speed pretty fast. We decided on the voice together, and I'll never forget. Of course, he had worked out the king, warrior, magician, lover
Hmm.
archetypes first. And he'd done a little bit of work on the shadows of those archetypes, especially the king. Uh, and after I'd studied the material and we'd had some conversations, I'll never forget, we're sitting in a cafe in Hyde Park in Chicago. I said, "You know what, Robert? I think these these shadows are bipolar. There's a quote unquote strong side and a weak side, or an overexpressed side and an underexpressed side."
Yeah, I sometimes think active and passive.
Yeah, active and
Mhm.
passive. Yeah. Um, and and there was just stunned silence as we're sitting at the table there. He said, "Yeah, okay. Huh. How does that work?" I said, "I'm not sure." But we started to name them, and and then I started working with it. So my main contribution to the system was the bipolar shadow
Hmm.
of each of the archetypes, and of course the voice of the book. So yeah, and then we didn't even have to write a book proposal. I just sent a one paragraph letter to Harper San Francisco at the time, and with a general idea of what this was going to be, what we were planning. They immediately accepted it,
Hmm.
and you know why? That's because Iron John was coming out, Robert Bly's Iron
Hmm.
John, not with Harper San Francisco, and they wanted a competitive book.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so
So there
so
was
we,
already like a buzz about this men's movement and
yes, there
probably
was. Yeah.
magazine articles and stuff about it.
I don't know how much media there was some media,
Hmm.
um, but Robert Bly and then Rich Tosi and some other guys had started a, a kind of it was more than primary or more than sort of a model. They developed a bit the New Warrior Training Network. That
Mhm.
had started a couple years or so before we wrote King Warrior Magician
Oh,
Lover.
really? I
Yeah.
could have sworn that came out after, like, inspired by King Warrior Magician Lover.
Well, what happened was no, the men's work had begun
Hmm.
here and there, and that's part of what inspired Robert. With the King Warrior Magician. I mean, there was some kind of synergy there before the book came out. Anyway, once the book came out, all kinds of men's organizations. It wasn't just the Mankind Project that became, the dominant one. But in those days, there were a bunch of things, the men's room and this and that and the other thing. And they all pretty much adopted King Warrior Magician along with Robert Bly's Iron John as sort of the Old Testament and the New Testament, right, of the
Hmm.
men's movement. Uh, and especially as the years passed, I think King Warrior Magician Lover became the basic Bible because
Hmm.
it was more than, of course, as you know, a collection of stories to illustrate Robert's and my emphasis on structure. You have
Hmm.
to get a hold of structure. You have to see it, and then you start working with it along basically Jungian lines in order to rearrange the furniture and the unconscious for a man and, you know, uh, become initiated. If you're doing the work, really become initiated into a new way of being a man.
Yeah. Yeah, I think of it as initiating yourself into fuller capacities of what it means
Yeah,
to be a man or what's possible for men.
right, right.
And I
Yeah.
think, like, for me, why it's been so enduring and remains a foundational text for the men's work that I do with individual men,
Mm,
is that the structure really helps. It's a great starting point to
yeah.
help get a sense of the psyche and the different aspects of the psyche. It brings in images and stories, so it's immediately grasped. We're not talking about abstract psychological concepts like the
Right.
complexes and things. So it's grounded in image, it's grounded in story, and I think that seems to really help men get into a more psychological way of thinking. And but it can't end there. For me, like, it's a great place to start, but
Mhm.
it can't turn into a kind of program, you know?
Right. Yeah, we meant it as the stories, by the way, from all kinds of diverse sources. Of course, are intended to catch men who are living stories themselves that may be similar, or the stories in the book may evoke memories of embodied memories of episodes in their own lives and so forth. Once you get the story, then you can introduce some theory or some structure, and then more story, and so forth. So it's kind of it was intended to do exactly what you're saying.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Now, uh, there's the book that everybody knows, the little blue book, King Warrior Magician Lover. But there is also larger books associated with
yeah,
each of the archetypes.
yeah.
Those have been like near impossible for me to find up here in Canada. But I know,
Anywhere,
yeah.
anywhere, really.
So was there a fuller book done for each one of the archetypes, or was that arrested at some point?
No, there were. I wrote four books with some of Robert's contribution too. The King Within, the Warrior Within, the Magician Within, the Lover Within. Yeah, and they were published by William Morrow.
Hmm.
They wanted the four books out within within a year, or was it
Wow.
2 years? I don't know. Anyway, that's all I did was write,
Hmm.
research and write and research and write and so on. Yeah, they go into much greater depth And Morrow wanted a little more academic style,
Hmm.
which just between you and me and the audience, I thought was probably a mistake,
Yeah.
but that's what they wanted.
Hmm.
So that's what I wrote. And at any rate, they sold pretty well, but William Morrow did not put the publicity, the marketing into the four books that Harper San Francisco put into the first one. I
Hmm.
mean, I for the first one, I was on the road doing interviews and this and that and this and that and book signings all over the country, a little bit in Canada, Alberta, for it altogether was like 4 weeks, three
Hmm.
weeks straight, a week off, and then hit the road again. Nothing for the Morrow books,
Hmm.
the William Morrow books. And, you know, uh, so they sold fairly well, but not well enough. And the rights reverted to me and to Robert's heirs.
Hmm.
So they're sitting there, and we have tried various ways to get them republished. Actually, two were republished. I think it was The King Within. Well, The King Within and The Magician Within, I think.
Hmm. Yeah. Those
By
are the
by
ones that are easiest to find.
yeah, by what's the name of the press? Anyway, it's the um, uh, Chicago Theological Seminary
Hmm.
Press. And then they stopped. If you want, I'm not going to tell you the gory details, but
Yeah. Yeah.
there were problems between Robert and Chicago Theological Seminary at the end, and especially the
Hmm.
publisher. So those things have been. I've got a couple of boxes of them upstairs. Uh, I so what is left on the market, way out of print now. What's left on the market is basically collector's items.
Hmm.
They're as collector's items and very expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any interest in maybe putting them out in a collected edition or something?
I do, I do,
Hmm.
but uh and supposedly to keep going with this, the rights have reverted back from Chicago Theological Seminary to me and to Robert's heirs. The but who would publish it? It's fairly, I don't want to say it's academic, but it is more detailed or
Hmm.
more same basic
Dense.
principle,
Hmm.
but more somewhat more cerebral, I guess, maybe
Hmm.
than King Warrior Magician Lover. And I've been living my life in writing other books, and off and on trying to get somebody interested in republishing them.